Thank you all for having me. SuperAwesome is a company some of you might have heard of, some of you might not. We started it about 2 years ago. Frankly, it's a series of accidents about how I came to be involved with the company and running something which is so heavily involved in the kids' audience. I suppose there's always some extremely important disclaimers that I need to give you. In fact, there's actually two, and it's incredibly important that you read both of them. Just warning you. So believe it or not, and I bumped into Rupert on the way in, I actually started in the video games industry, although these days it's getting so long ago that I tend to forget. I was the co-founder of a company called Demonware, which ended up being acquired by Activision and becoming part of that small little niche franchise called Call of Duty. After that, we built a social game studio, which was acquired by GameStop, the US retailer. So I have a very unusual background of both retail gaming and regular console gaming. Since then, I've become an investor in a bunch of different startups in the technology space, in digital media. Somehow, again, accidentally, I became a venture capitalist. So I'm a venture partner with Hoxton Ventures. And I'm also sort of an advisor and on the board of a few other bits and pieces. One of the reasons, in fact, I would say probably the primary reason that I ended up getting into the kids marketing space over the last couple of years is we had an investment in a kids games company that, you know, in technical terms, kind of went a little bit sideways. And we were trying to figure out what the hell was happening in the space, because the management team was good, the game was good. And the more we started digging into it, the more I saw just how much change was happening in this new generation of kids. Just kind of quick question, hands up, who's got kids that they know of? Okay, about half of you. And the more I kind of started to dig into this space, the more I saw that there was a real seismic change that was actually happening here. Platform fragmentation is huge. So, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, if you were a brand of any description and you wanted to communicate with kids, it was probably TV, the side of buses, and maybe a little bit of web. Now, kids are distributed everywhere. You know, the bar charts are numerous, and it's a big, long horizontal axis. We've seen massive behavioral change. You know, how a kid plays a game on tablet is pretty different to how a kid plays or played a game on console or even on a web browser. You know, virtual worlds and mobile gaming are now two very, very different things. You know, we are seeing mature digital brands that came out of the kids' audience. You know, Minecraft, Moshi, to a degree, Angry Birds as well. And the really interesting thing that intrigued me was that this was an audience that was changing massively, but which also had structural restrictions on data to find out what was really going on. You know, you're not allowed to find or take certain data from kids under 16 and under 13, depending on where you are. And essentially, this is what, you know, brands of every shape and form are faced with today. Kids are absolutely everywhere. So we decided to build a company to try and solve this problem. This was the reaction I got from people who I suggested this idea to. It's also how some of you appear to feel at the moment, judging from some of the expressions. So anyway, a couple of years later, we built what is actually the biggest kids marketing platform in Europe. We reach about 30 million uniques a month. We've got ad networks, kid-specific content ad networks on web, mobile, online video. We own or operate a few properties like Binweevils and Swap It. And we also have a physical thing where we send out free physical boxes of stuff to kids called Box of Awesome, and a girl's version called Box of OMG, which has been hugely popular. I'm not really going to talk about much of this. A lot of the time I get asked, you know, what the hell is going on with kids these days? So I've amalgamated a whole bunch of slides about some of the data that we're seeing across, you know, 30 million kids a month and all of our experience with brands and agencies. They're kind of observations, they're points. I guess the single thing that would be great to take away from this is just how much change is happening with kids these days and what that's going to mean in a few years' time, because they're all feeding into games, they're all feeding into our games, and they are different. I know every generation says that they're different, but honestly, this group of kids growing up is very, very different. I also, I suppose from another perspective that I bring, I sit on the board of Brown Bag Films, the animation studio. They're the folks behind Henry Hugglemonster, Octonauts, and things like that. So I also see the world from a TV perspective as well. So I suppose kind of cutting to the chase in terms of the data. Some of this stuff you might know, some of it you may not. And we have all of this is drawn from the research arm of the company that we have. So we do all the marketing stuff, but we also look at lots and lots of data and lots of insights. We also have slightly confusing graphs. Our designer sort of takes an interesting approach. The big trend that we're seeing, and this has been surveyed over the last 12 months, the percentage of kids, this is all UK data, percentage of kids who own their own tablet is up from 24% last year to about 35% this year. No big surprise that there's a tablet in roughly every 1 out of 2 homes, and it's also probably not a huge surprise that about half of all of those tablets are iPads of some description. I'll pull in some other people's research where I think it's good, or to make fun of it, depending. This is from friends of ours called Interpret over in LA. They do some good stuff. And they did a survey this is about a year ago. So this is back when we were talking about the 24% ownership in the UK. And it asked parents of kids who own tablets what percentage they actually had. And you can see there's actually a surprisingly consistent ownership proportion across all of the countries, except inexplicably for France, where they don't give their kids iPad devices whatsoever. I'm going to, insert joke about croissants. I don't know. I got nothing. That's what's going on in the market. We did something very, very interesting in October last year. When all of the pre-Christmas marketing around Xbox One and PlayStation 4 was being announced, we put a survey out to about 2,000 kids, again, UK-based, 8 to 14, boys and girls. And we asked them a very simple question. What would you like for Christmas? And this was at the peak of all the console marketing. So there were, possibly tens of millions being spent at that particular time. And this is a word cloud of the response that we got back. Does anyone remember when Apple launched the iPad? Anyone remember? Feels like years ago, right? April 2014 was when Apple released the iPad. And this is the impact it's having in the games industry today, despite the huge amounts of marketing that games companies are spending. So Apple is whether we like it or not, and whether it's deliberate on their part or not, they are reshaping the notion of the games industry with this generation of kids. We also, we do lots of surveys with kids and monthly reports and things like that, and we ask them, so this is data collected over all of 2013 from 8 to 10-year-olds. What are your most used apps? So again, this is not chart data, this is actually asking the kids directly. You see some gaming brands there that shouldn't be of much of a surprise. YouTube is by far the biggest thing that kids use. And in fact, YouTube is pretty much the biggest kids brand on the planet today. I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. Interestingly, about half of the top 10 are chat applications. Everyone knows chat is exploding, but you probably don't realize just how big it is amongst kids. And about 60% of kids who have a smartphone use some kind of chat application on it. That's what they tell us. In reality, that number is probably closer to 80 or maybe even 90%. This is one of my favorite graphs of all time. You should all photo this and tweet it. About 18 months ago, we started showing data to some of our clients saying that kids were starting to leave Facebook. And the initial response is, ho, 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 you guys, you don't know what you're talking about. we have seen more and more of this data. So this is collected from monthly data going back to 2010, surveyed between 4 and 18-year-olds, but obviously centering around that kind of 8 to 14 mark. The blue graph at the top is Facebook usage. The red one, which is almost as interesting, is YouTube usage. Now, if you go into a classroom of kids and you ask them how many have got a Facebook account, they will all put their hands up. If you ask the same group of kids, yes, but how many of you actually use your Facebook account every day, there's less and less hands going up. This is really happening. This is kind of data from the ground. And again, you can see that YouTube more and more is becoming, despite it being a relatively old digital property, is increasing momentum within the kid space at the moment. And you know, this is kind of correlated by the amount of online video that's being watched. So this is a graph from IHS which shows the value of video being shown on kind of regular TV, or sorry, catch-up TV and online. So you can see it's growing. When you ask kids where they find their favorite video from, YouTube is just crushing it, time and time again. You know, despite the proliferation of everything else. And it, you know, if I just kind of go back to this graph, you know, I'm sure you've all read about how Facebook is trying to essentially fragment their own product stack. They're doing it specifically for this reason. Facebook is rapidly becoming a network of parents, which from an advertising point of view is extremely lucrative, but from a long-term sustainable point of view is something that kind of brings the whole thing into question. So by, you know, splitting out your product stack and chasing after different pieces, he's actually going after the kids market. This, again, is a graph from Kleiner Perkins, the VC over on the West Coast, really just corroborates the whole YouTube growth story. This is the number of hours of video uploaded to YouTube per minute. And a huge amount of this in 12 and 13 is being driven by kids under the age of 14, more and more of it. You all know digital, or you know, this notion of kind of second screen. With kids, you know, third screen is becoming more and more common. Fourth screen is something we joke about, but is a reality. You know, kids are spending much more time in front of screens or near to screens. This is another graph from Kleiner Perkins. It kind of shows internet usage in China. About a year and a half ago, mobile internet usage actually exceeded desktop internet usage. That is happening, that same graph is happening amongst kids in the UK and in the US right now. We asked kids, this was in 2013, November I think, 82% of kids say that they use multiple screens. You probably know that already. Here's a particularly interesting stat. For whatever reason, girls are 3 times more likely to use screens than boys. Multitasking comes early. True, proper stat. Why do you care? This is one of the reasons you care. I love graphs, or I've come to love graphs. I think it's probably a more accurate way of describing it. If you look at on the left-hand side, this is 8 to 12-year-old girls. This was sampled this year. The green is gaming, the purple is reading, and the blue is magazines. Sorry, social networks. And you can see how they're ranked when they're between the ages of 8 to 12. What's interesting is as they get older and social networking in all its various guises increases, not only is reading decreasing, but gaming is actually decreasing as well. This is something to watch. Again, kind of back to my point about gaming behaviors getting changed quite a lot. There was talk about, I could talk about discovery for a while. I think the point that when I'm talking to brands and you know, big companies who are trying to engage with kids, one of the things I say is that, look, you need to distinguish between a monetization platform, which is most of the mobile app stores that we know, and a content discovery platform, which is not most of the mobile app stores that we know. You know, one is designed to make money, and the other that we're looking for, this kind of this notion of discovery for content, they're very, very different things. And I think particularly when it comes to kids, that gets quite tricky. This is kind of a little left field, but I thought you might be interested for any of you who are, building games or publishing in the kid space. With books, what we find is that if you present a series of books to kids, they're far more likely to buy the first one if they know that there's a universe there to explore. So about 3/4 of them say they will buy the rest of them once they buy the first one. Once there's a universe there, they are interested. And again, I just kind of threw this in. I thought you might be interested. In terms of ebooks, I don't know if any of you have exposure to it. Ebooks for kids have not been a huge success. It's challenging. Most kids think that ebooks are way more expensive than they actually are. So it probably shows the gap between book publishers and kids even today. So chat and gaming. Some of this stuff you'll know. You might know a lot about this particular stat up on the screen. Chat and video are the two things which define our generation of kids today. Both are much, much bigger than they ever were. About 5 years ago, MSN at its peak had about 330 million active users a month. Now if you look at the combination of the biggest chat applications, and both those numbers are probably out of date, frankly, already, it's about 2, maybe even 3 times that size. This is one of the things that's defining kids. And, I already showed you this. 60% of kids say they're using chat. In reality, it's probably close to about 100%. WhatsApp comes up roughly about 50% of the time in terms of what specific application they're looking or they're using. Interestingly, Facebook Messenger has started to pop up quite rapidly. So even though kids aren't using core Facebook as much, they are using Facebook Messenger. Again, you can see why Facebook are breaking down their own product stack to try and chase after these individual verticals. We ask kids why they use chat applications. We're still struggling to interpret the data exactly. Or not. But below all of this shows just the sheer multitude of noise that's going on within that chat vertical for kids. So when we ask them, what are you using? WhatsApp comes up, Facebook Messenger comes up, but there's about another 7 or 8 below that, and there's probably more being added every sort of day. So it is definitely getting noisy out there. WhatsApp is going mainstream. How many people, Snapchat is going mainstream. How many people use Snapchat? Hands? Okay, I know more of you use it than that, right? In 6 months' time, you'll all be okay admitting it, trust me. This week, they just released full chat functionality for it. It's actually very, very good. Snapchat is going to be as popular as WhatsApp for kids within, I would say, 9 to 12 months. If you look at their DAUs over MAUs, their trajectory is pretty clear. That's been a fascinating pattern to evolve because it's happened extremely quickly, probably 6 to 8 months it's gotten to that point. I'm not going to linger too much on this simply because most of you will know it already. This, again, we asked kids, what are you playing? What is the most important gaming brand to you? Frankly, there's no huge big surprises there, other than kids tend to be, all appearances to the contrary, slightly more long-tail gamers than early adopters. Although often you find that they're actually both, but they will hang around brands much longer than other people. I'm actually not sure about this slide. It's from Interpret, and they came out with this data about a year ago, and it shows conversion rates for both premium purchases and IAP for mobile games on tablets owned by kids, supervised by parents. So I'd be careful about tweeting this because I still wonder about some of the numbers. But when kids' games work, they can convert extremely well. Brings challenges to everyone. Virtual worlds, I'm not beating up on Moshi here, by the way, it's just their ComScore number happened to be floating around. One of the biggest things we're seeing with kids is there's a migration away from virtual worlds. Virtual worlds aren't going to zero or aren't disappearing or anything like that, but there's a rebalancing of where the audience is. That's why Moshi are putting a lot of investment into mobile quite correctly. And bear in mind, it has been kids who have single-handedly resurrected the trading card market. So this is growth, digital and physical, in the collectible card genre over the last few years. So last 2-3 slides, people always ask me, okay, well, so what? You're telling me all the bad stuff. How do we actually go and fix it? There, 3 themes I'll give you, 2 already: chat, YouTube. The third is this notion of kids being creators. That kid at the top is actually an Irish kid called Jordan Casey. He's from Waterford. He started coding his own games at the age of 10. 10. He started his own games company this year. He's now 13. There's more and more kids out there who are capable of building stuff, who have access to these kind of frameworks that we never had, even 5 years ago. You've seen more high-profile examples recently, like Nick. But there is a growing ability of kids, or a growing trend in giving kids tools and the ability to create and interact with and manipulate their own environments, and you're going to see amazing things. We ask kids, how much exposure have you had to programming? And about a quarter of them, and these were kids between 8 and 14, said that they had experimented with some kind of code, be it Scratch or any kind of markup or HTML or something like that. A third of them have used Photoshop or InDesign, and about a third of them have actually uploaded a video to YouTube. This is a generation that is going to be much more technical and much more creative than us. This is kind of backed up by 2 things. I think one of the driving success factors for Minecraft was they just right time, right place, right trend, right audience. You let kids create. Interestingly, in the toy market, one of the very few toy categories that is actually growing at the moment is construction toys. It's true. So that's what we're seeing. I'm around later on. I'm about to get yanked off the stage. Thank you all very much. Keep an eye on what kids are doing. It's going to change everything for us as they evolve. Thank you.